Hey everyone, welcome to another video. In this video, this is part 2 of creating a process that will enforce default constraints. So in the previous video, I gave a quick PowerPoint before I went into actually making the relationships, and I'm going to do the same thing today. And even better is that in the description, you will find a comment layout, because when we get into the actual code, I will basically take that KeyNote, the code section, and make it comments. And because we're getting far deeper and deeper into the system, I think this is the process I'm going to take now. I'll lay out my comments. That'll keep me on track, and that'll give anyone who can't really follow along due to single screen or what have you, the ability to look at the comments and go, okay, I know what I need to do here given my system. So hope you enjoy, and we will be creating a procedure that will enforce our defaults for any table. I will see you after the title. So we already have the relationship set up to relate a definition to a data point, and we have the definition to process. So now, starting from the data point, we're going to bridge the gap and create the code to create a default. Now this is SQL's basic default create scripts, drop if exists. And this is what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be taking in a dataset ID for each data point for that data set. We're going to figure out the type. We're going to get the definition from the type. If the definition is empty, we're going to get a null. That's going to be our default, a null default. And then we're going to get the process for that definition that was returned, and it will return a null default, or a null, reflect null if we get if we fall through and that definition is null. We're going to execute that process to get the value, and then execute the dynamic SQL to actually drop and or create our default constraint. So in the description below, you will find this code, and you can copy and paste it in SSMS. It's got the tokenized constraints, and it's got the comments for what we're going to do. Now it's going to take us quite a bit to get through this video, so I'm just going to start. We need a dataset ID. That's going to be the incoming parameter, so we can create a table, grab the ID, send it forward. To get the database ID, or to get the database name for our tokenized script, we need the database ID. We need the process ID. We need the definition ID that's linked to the DataPointType, and the definition ID if it's null, if we don't have one. We need the DataPointType ID to figure out what we're going to relate to what. And then we're going to need basically the names for everything. The database name, the process name. We don't need the definition name, but we do need the DataPoint name. We don't need a definition ID null name, but we do need a dataset name. And then we're going to declare our SQL scripts. We have the default, which is the above comment, but then we also need a SQL script for the process. What are we dynamically executing? And since we're getting an output, we need a parameter SQL script for that process section. And let's do a little formatting here so everything's in line. So now we're just going to go through our normal routine. All right, I have a dataset incoming, so I need the dataset database ID. I need the dataset name for that ID that's incoming. And because I got the database ID, I'm going to need the database name to replace that token. So I need to call the database views for the database ID that's incoming. I need the definition, ID for the null version. So I just need that one definition piece. Make sure that's the null version. Remove the rest. And how we're going to do that is we're going to look for the definition type ID, and we're going to use the functions that we've created to get the system object common default type. And just to make sure these work, I recommend you always call your function. Just add a select before it, call it, make sure it's returned. And then we need to also filter by the key name because we just want the specific null one. So then we're going to start filling out our SQL scripts. So the parameters, we're going to say return value is whatever the process name is, and our 3 variables for that process, I do variable key, variable text, and variable JSON. And I messed this one up, my bad. So this is parameters, so it's at return value and varchar 100 output. And then for the actual base code, I just pasted what I had written. We're going to do the select at return value equals process name, variable text, variable key, text, and JSON. And then we're going to need to fill out our default base, which is provided in the comments in the description. And I think that's all we need, so we can create our our cursor. I'm using DevArts SQL Complete. I'm just going to call it DataPoint, so the rest of it fills out. And from the DataPoint select view, I need the type ID in the name, where the DataPoint DataSetId is the incoming DataSetId. So I can format this a little bit, and I'll get the comments inside of the cursor and fill out the fetch next statement. I'm going to try to create pauses in between pronouncing the weird names inside of the view so the pattern starts to stick, like definition, DataPointType, DataPoint, DataSetId. It's very important. But to continue, we don't need the DataPointId or DataPointType ID because we're getting it from the DataPointType table. So I'm going to clear out the definition ID, and then I'm going to select the definition ID from the system relationship table, the primary key parent implied field from rel system relationship, where the system relationship primary key child implied is the DataPointType ID. And the system relationship type ID, see that pause, is from our type ID function. So parent child, definition's the parent, to DataPointType, which is the child. It's a functional relationship. It's they are directly related to each other, and it's a member. Like I said, I forgot if I used 2 or the number 2. Always run your functions to make sure they return values. So I did use the number 2. So now that we have the definition ID for the DataPointType, we're going to see if that came back empty. And if it's empty, we're just going to automatically assign the null version, the null definition. So now our definition has to have a value in it. So I'm going to get the process ID by basically copying the relationship code we had just written, changing the child to parent and the relationship from definition to process, or from definition DataPointType to definition to process, and make sure that the parent is from the definition ID. Then we'll go ahead and query the process table to get the name for that ID. At this point, we're going to replace that process replace the process base and execute it. If the process ID comes back as null, when we replace the process name, it's going to execute and nothing's going to happen. It might not be the best fail-safe, but you know, it works. It's not going to run it. Adding all of the security, adding all of the checks and the messaging tables, that's in the future, but to save time, we just cannot do that at this moment. So I'm just going through and replacing all of my tokens from my process script, the process name. I'll format that, and next will be the variable key. Now, even though we don't use it for 3 out of 4, I'm just going to send the dataset ID. I mean, there's no harm in that. And that's kind of why we developed, or why I chose those 3 values. I'm going to replace the other two with a string null, so it'll tell the function just to pass nulls, and it won't do anything because, you know, all of them, all four that we've created, don't use the text or the JSON. Now we can execute it and get the process value back, which is a variable that I did forget to declare. So I will declare that real quick, process value, and make sure that in our dynamic SQL, we null out the process value, but also we mark it as output, so we do get that value back. Finally, I can actually copy the replace statement because I need to replace 4 tokens, but on the default side. So I'll replace base and execute with the default counterparts. I'll go up to the comments that I had provided and just make sure I'm at the right replace. There we go. And start replacing tokens again. So this will actually alter our defaults. Let's see. DataPoint. And then process value. So the last step is to execute this script, and I'm going to execute it and print it at the same time because I think it's gonna work and I want to see if it doesn't work. So I'll just go to the top and give it a DataSetId of 1. Don't know what that is. Okay, so the identity, no big deal. Let's just go ahead and look through and see if our defaults change. So the null is correct. Let's look for something else. Specific dataset number is 1. Let's find a true and a false. There's a false, and there's a true. Okay, so I'm gonna give it a different number and make sure the specific dataset number is working. And it's a 6 now. Okay, so that's definitely working. For this primary key thing, I totally spaced that. So we're just going to go into our cursor and say, and the DataPointType ID is not in. Give me the DataPointType ID from the DataPointType select view, where the key name is UDT primary key, because UDT primary key is always an identity. Let's make sure that returns. There we go. And it looks good, no errors. So this, every time we send a data set to this procedure, which we will create right now, it will go through each column and make sure that our defaults are there, so we don't have to include a lot of data when we're calling our change management procedures, which is later on in the future. We actually send it the word default, and it will use the default value. It's actually a really cool piece of code. So just go ahead and adjust this DataSetId. Put it in the parameters. There we go. And I'll scroll through it and let you read it. But that's it for this video. I know it's a little long one, but the deeper we get into this stuff, the more we're gonna have to do 1 and 2 part. Hope you enjoyed. Nice little default enforcer. And thank you very much for watching. So remember, like this video and YouTube will recommend it to other users, and subscribe to support me. Have a good one, and I will see you for our retro planning.